This is the FLYSKY ELYSIUM EL18. And if you're thinking that this is some new radical design for an RC controller, you're right, but you're actually kind of a little bit wrong. Because I first got my hands on this radio in 2018. No, not this exact radio, but like this model of radio. And back then, it was called the FLYSKY Nirvana, and it was released in partnership with FLYSKY and a company called Underground FPV. And for all the success that that radio might have had, and there are many things about this radio that are really, really smart, really clever, and really desirable. For all the success that radio might have had, it was completely torpedoed, and the people who bought it were left high and dry with a radio that basically had no support. So now it's back in 2022. And the question is, should we give it a second chance? I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Before we get into the review of this radio, we should take a look back at the history of why this radio failed the first time it was released. And the short version of the story, I'm not even sure I'm going to remember all the details. There were three sort of entities involved with the release. A company called Underground FPV, who helped with the marketing and helped with some of the development. FLYSKY, who obviously did most of the hardware design and manufacturing with input from Underground FPV. And then the third party would be OpenTX, the open source developers who developed the firmware that most of our radios run on. Underground FPV actually went out of business and stopped existing shortly after the radio was released. So they weren't there to support the radio. And OpenTX never actually fully supported the radio. The radio had a touchscreen, and OpenTX didn't have support for touchscreen interfaces. So there was custom firmware that you had to get directly from FLYSKY, but you downloaded it from Banggood for some reason. And then for a while, Underground FPV was distributing custom firmware that they developed to try to help their users out, but then they went out of business. And long story short, the people who bought the radio essentially ended up with something that, I mean, it was usable in its current form, but it certainly wasn't feature complete, and it didn't get any updates. And a lot of people probably have one of these sitting in their closet somewhere that they just don't use. So what's different today? One of the things that's different today is that this radio is fully supported by EdgeTX. So that means that this radio is no longer dependent on a small company like Underground FPV that might just up and disappear, or even a large company like FLYSKY that might just have other things that they're busy working on. The EdgeTX developers have nothing to do with their time, apparently, other than develop EdgeTX and make firmware that runs on our radios. So if you buy this radio today, you can be reasonably sure that you will get software support going forward, and that certainly is better than the original release. Now, normally at this part in the review, I'd show some other radios that run the same EdgeTX or OpenTX firmware, and I'd say that all EdgeTX and OpenTX radios have basically the same feature set. They just have different form factors. Some are a joystick style form factor with a smaller screen. Some are a larger form factor with a larger screen. But at the end of the day, the menus and the options that they support are basically the same, and so we're not going to focus a lot in the review on the features of the radio, except for the key ones that actually distinguish this radio from other OpenTX and EdgeTX radios. And to some degree, that's true also for the FLYSKY ELYSIUM. It is a radio running EdgeTX firmware, and it has the same basic features and options that all EdgeTX radios have. But one of the things that makes the ELYSIUM different is that it only is interfaced with by a touchscreen. So it doesn't have any menu button, back button, etc. It is... touchscreen turns off very quickly by default. For example, if I long press here, I will get a menu that gives me the option to do many of the things that I would press a button for on some of the other radios. But if I pick one of these options, like model settings, here we can see we've got the model settings screen, and it is very similar to the model settings screen on any of the other radios that I might use. The latest version of EdgeTX has been revamped a little bit to be more usable on touchscreens. So for example, here's the internal RF options, and if I go into the internal RF options here, I've got all the options that you would expect to see. The layout's a little bit different. Some things are compressed into other menus as opposed to be just sort of laid out in a list. but the basic structure is there. How do I go back? There's no back button. Do I tap up here? I guess I do. Okay, great. So if we go through this menu, it will seem very familiar to a lot of people. Here's the flight modes. Here are the inputs. Here's the mixes, right? All of the screens that you're used to seeing. Here are the outputs. Here's the custom curves. What else we got? Global variables, logical switches, special functions, and telemetry. Exactly the same as any EdgeTX or OpenTX radio. We're just accessing it via the touch menu. Now, whether this is a good thing or not, I'm not sure. It's cool to have a touchscreen and to be able to use the touchscreen for everything. But if you've got a radio like the Radiomaster TX16S, it also has a touchscreen, but you also have a jog wheel if you prefer to just spin a knob or press a button. And there definitely are times when I've been using this radio where I have wished that I just had a button I could click without having to look down at the screen and go tap, 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 tap. That being said, maybe that's just me being an old fogey, and it's just, you know, lots of people prefer to use touch screens for everything, and the touchscreen interface is not bad. It would be easy to look at the design of this radio and conclude that it is just a freaking joke, and that like what were they thinking? And it turns out that's not true. They, and in this case, they is Underground FPV, who did a lot of the work on the original development of this shape. They put a lot of thought into the ergonomics of the radio. And the idea is that your hand fits nicely here in the back. They got these two little nubs here that your fingers fit nicely around to help you grip. Your hand wraps nicely around these little sticky outy parts here, and you just have great ergonomics. The radio balances very well. The balance point is just behind right here, so it rests very well balanced in your hands and fits pretty well. It seems like it would fit a wide variety of hands. People with very large hands, I don't think are going to have too much of a problem getting them on there. People with very small hands may be able to choke up a little bit. It's a much smarter design than it appears at first, although it's obviously not going to be for everyone. If I want to use thumbs to control the sticks, I have plenty of room here. I can find a grip that gives me full reach there. If I want to use pinch grip instead, I just choke up one finger like so, and I can pinch, and I have a lot of versatility in where I put my fingers. I can easily adjust. There's another ridge right here that I might want to rest my second finger in, or heck, I could even go a little further if I wanted to. Whatever's going to work for me best, I'm going to have the flexibility to do it. There's a lot of versatility in how you can hold this radio, and I think just about anybody is going to be able to find a comfortable hand position for the way they like to work. The radio has a ton of switches and controls. So here on the top, we've got 3 position, 2 position, and some twisty knobs. Nice. Here are the trim switches, and of course, with the programmability of EdgeTX and OpenTX, you can program those trim switches to be just regular momentary switches and use them for whatever you want a momentary switch to do. Or if you fly airplanes and you actually need trim switches, they could just be trim switches. On the back of the radio, there's 4 more switches. We've got 2 3 positions here and here, a 2 position, and a momentary on the right index finger where it usually is. And the idea with these switches is that you can just reach up with your finger while you're flying and manipulate them easily without having to move your hand out of the way. It's kind of weird when you first see them, but they're actually really cleverly placed. They're not so close that you might accidentally hit them, especially with a little bit of experience with the radio, but they're well within reach, and it just gives you just that little bit more of ergonomics. Very, very clever. The radio feels extremely solid in the hand. It has no flex. There's no, like some radios, if you kind of squeeze them, you can kind of feel the plastic flexing and moving, and maybe it creaks a little bit. It just feels a little bit cheap. This radio feels extremely solid and well made, and I just wouldn't feel hesitant at all about having it sort of bounce around in a bag. I mean, I might worry about some of these switches breaking off, sure, but overall the build quality just feels exceptional, and it feels really premium. The Elysium comes in at 770 grams, which is about 2/3 the weight of a TX16S and about twice the weight of a Radiomaster Zorro. So somewhere in the middle there in terms of how heavy it's going to be during a long flight session. It does come with a neck strap you can put here, but you can see from the location of the neck strap, that's going to be useful for sort of hanging the radio if you don't want to hold it, or protecting the radio if you were to accidentally drop it, but you're not going to be able to support the weight of the radio from the neck strap because it's all the way at the bottom instead of on the center. The batteries are in the handle, and you can just unscrew the end cap, and it is an 18650 cell. They're not included. You have to provide them yourself, and as you can see, you can take one out and leave the other in, and the radio will stay powered up if, like, you wanted to replace a cell that was wearing down in the middle of a long flight session where you didn't want to, I don't know. It's kind of cool. That implies that the batteries are in parallel, and it does make me wonder if they've put protection internally to protect against the current that would flow between the batteries when you had one that was at a different charge level than the other. If they were smart, they would have designed it with completely different charging circuits for the two different batteries. I can't remember if that's the case. I think I remember it having smart charging circuitry, but I honestly, it's been so long that I'm not sure. If you're familiar with EdgeTX and OpenTX radios, then you've probably been wondering where the SD card slot is on this radio. The SD card slot is not internal to the radio, like the Tango 2, where you have to just take the whole damn radio apart to get at the SD card, but it is hidden. It is behind the neck strap holder. So to get at the SD card, you'll need to remove these two screws on the back side of the radio with a 2.5 millimeter driver, and then the neck strap holder just slides off and the SD card is accessible. The neck strap holder has another secret for us. Underneath this screw is the bootloader button. If you get into a situation where you can't update the radio, or it's not responding, or you flashed the wrong firmware, if you bricked it in some way, the fix is to hold down a bootloader button and then flash it over USB. Most OpenTX and EdgeTX radios just automatically enter bootloader mode when you plug in USB with the radio powered down, but I guess not this one because it has a bootloader button and it is underneath this screw. So you would take that screw out, you would literally put a screwdriver through the screw hole to push the button on the circuit board underneath. The gimbals on the radio are better than average for a radio in this price point. There's very little flex at the edges. I can't help but notice that there doesn't seem to be any way to adjust like the tension or throw of the gimbals from the outside of the radio. Yes, there are some access holes here. They are screw holes to hold the module adapter bay. More on that in a second, but they also, much like this one here with the bootloader button, there's a couple buttons that you stick a screwdriver through to press a button to do a thing, but there isn't any adjustment for the gimbals here on the outside. Opening the radio is not too difficult. You just pull off these grips and you remove a few screws around the outside and it splits in half. I'm not going to do that for you here, but it's kind of nice to be able to adjust the gimbals without taking the radio apart. Like the way Radio Master does it, where the screws are right here on the front of the gimbal. Choice. Now we come to the single biggest thing about this radio that I wish FlySky had changed. And it seems like what they've done is they've taken the radio from 2018, which had a lot going for it, and then they've just kind of updated it for 2022 by putting EdgeTX on it, which is good, but they left the original RF module in there. And the original RF module for this radio is, get this, is it a FreeSky module? No, this is a FlySky radio. Is it a 4-in-1 module, a multi-protocol module? Oh, if only. It's a FlySky module. It binds to FlySky receivers and nothing else. Now don't get me wrong. FlySky actually makes a better, I think they make a better air protocol than FreeSky. I'm just going to say it. Ooh, controversial hot take, Bardwell. FlySky makes a really good air protocol. It has low latency, it has decent range, but it is an older generation of protocol. It is in the FlySky spectrum frequency hopping generation where, you'll get 500 meters of range. Maybe you'll get a kilometer. Fan me and bring me a mint julep. We are not in that world anymore. The standard for air protocols today is protocols like Tracer, Crossfire, Immersion RC Ghost, and Express LRS. And they deliver 10, 20, 30 kilometers of range. And if you're thinking, well, I don't fly 10 kilometers out, what do I care? That's under the optimal circumstances. The actual range you get when you're flying around obstacles can be significantly reduced. The bottom line is there is no excuse in this day and age to release a radio with just a FlySky receiver module in it, or transmitter module in it. At the very least, you should do a 4-in-1 module so people can bind, because here's the other problem. FlySky is a fine radio protocol. Nobody's making bind and flies with FlySky receivers in them. Nobody's making tiny whoops with FlySky receivers in them. Barely anybody's making FlySky receivers except FlySky. So at the very least, they could have put a 4-in-1 module in here and given you the option to bind to all the bind and flies that come with, well, basically FreeSky, but anything else you could think of. But they didn't. It's a FlySky module, which means that essentially the internal module on this radio is going to be useless to a lot of people. So what about an external module? Well, there is a port here for an external module, and I don't have it, but I can show you here in the manual. They've got two adapters. One is for a light style module, and one is for a JR style module. And that's cool and all, but then when you put that module on the back, it's just sort of stuck on here and ruining the nice clean lines of the radio, and you still have an internal module that's just no freaking use to you. So I wish they hadn't done that, but they're FlySky, so of course they're going to put a FlySky module in it, right? Okay. I think this radio is going to be kind of polarizing. A lot of people are going to be turned off by just how weird and different it looks. They're just going to want something safer and more traditional, and they're just not even going to consider this radio. But some people are going to think it's the coolest damn thing they've ever seen. And if you're one of those people, I think it's worth taking a chance to get it. I don't actually know how much they're going to be charging for this radio. So if it's like $800 or something ridiculous, then maybe just that's a non-starter. But assuming it comes in at a reasonable price, if this radio really appeals to you, I think it's worth a shot. It is in so many ways objectively a good radio. It's really solid. It's really well made. It's got tons of switches. It looks freaking cool as heck. And the ergonomics are, well, I want to say the ergonomics are objectively good. Ergonomics are always subjective to some degree, and I can't be 100% sure it's going to work for everybody, but all of the sort of weird decisions they made in how it looks were driven by a desire to make it fit well in your hands, and I do think that they succeeded at that, but I can't be 100% sure because everybody's hands are different. So I think if you're looking at this and you think it's the coolest damn thing you've ever seen and it's in your budget, I think it's worth a shot. Just have to be willing to use a freaking module bay adapter on the back and ruin all the clean lines because they put a FlySky module on the inside of it. If you do decide to pick it up, there are links down in the video description below this video, and I would love if you use those links because they're affiliate links. And that means that every time you click that link and then make any purchase at the affiliated vendor, I get a small commission. If you want to support the channel, but you haven't signed up on Patreon and all the other ways you could support the channel you don't feel like doing, that's cool. It's whatever. But using those affiliate links is an easy way for you to support the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. You just got to go find the affiliate link, click the link, make your purchase, and then I get a commission. It's an easy thing to do. What do you think about this radio? Tell me in the comments because I think it's going to be polarizing. I wish I could do a poll in the comments and ask you, but just tell me down in the comments what your thoughts are. Are you buying it? Do you love it? Do you hate it? What do you wish it had that it doesn't have? Now here's the part of the video where I suggest something for you to watch next, and it's a real treat. You see, I took down all of my videos about the original Nirvana radio. I had made a bunch of tutorials about it and an original review. And I took them all down because the support that the users were not getting, I didn't want to promote the radio in any way. I didn't want people to buy it because people were just getting screwed over. That's not going to be true for this radio, as I said earlier in the video. I don't want you to get the wrong impression. But I am going to open up my original review of the Nirvana NV14. And if you want to see the things I had to say about the radio back in 2018 and see Joshua from the past with more hair and less beard, then I'll put a card on screen and you can check that out. See you there.